What's going on, ladies and gents, boys and girls, guardians of all ages, Joker back again once again, and today people, we are talking about This Week in Bungie. Bungie is basically overhauling Destiny from the ground up, as far as weapons and stat systems go, and honestly, I'm all for it. I'll get into it more later, but these changes will recontextualize and shift the way that we look at stats, and the way that those stats are used in-game. This is brilliant because without nullifying things that you already have, it creates new incentives to chase loot. The two main stats we'll be mostly talking about today are stability and resilience. For a lot of weapons and classes, these stats weren't really necessary. Now, they are. And by recontextualizing these stats and making them more important, Bungie has created an incentive to go back and farm weapons and armor with these stats, or perks like rapid fire and perpetual motion that help with these stats. It's an interesting injection of build crafting that will mainly only matter in PvP. I know, right? We're not even a minute into this video and I'm praising Bungie? Where's the real Joker? What has Bungie done with him? Gasp, shock, horror, lightning crackle, lightning crackle, lightning crackle. It's almost like when Bungie does something good, I praise it, and have been doing so a lot. But hey, details. Jokes aside, I love these changes on paper. Keyword, on paper. They could release and feel horrible, and we'll talk about that possibility later in the video. Now, we won't be covering every minute change, like Huckleberry had an underwhelming engagement range, updated base zoom, in this video at least. If you want that, let me know in the comments below. Also, I have really bad sinuses right now. I'll try to edit out what I can. If I miss something, my apologies. So, without further ado, let's get into the TWAB. The TWAB is something like 8,000 plus words, it's 29 pages long, so without commentary, this video would be an hour long. So the changes we're going to focus on are the changes that I find to be the biggest ones coming down the pipeline. The changes to Flinch, in-air accuracy, and special ammo. Global changes, Flinch. Aim deflection on receiving damage, typically called Flinch, is a common pain point, particularly on primary ammo weapons. We have rebuilt the stability weapon stat to grant resistance in addition to other effects, with a minimum flinch resistance of 10% to 25% dependent on the weapon's archetype. With this change, players can build for flinch resistance more easily on weapons that feel flinch more than others, and less on special weapons, which we don't want to be easier to use when under fire. From internal playtest, you may not feel the difference when using just one source of flinch resistance, but when stacking two or more sources, the benefit is strong. Note that higher zoom weapons are more affected by flinch, which we took into account when tuning these numbers. Here's the breakdown for flinch resistance with 100 stability. 25% auto rifles, submachine guns, bows, 20% pulse rifles, scout rifles, sidearms, machine guns, 15% hand cannons, trace rifles, 10% fusion rifles, shotguns, sniper rifles, grenade launchers, both breach and drum, linear fusion rifles, both special and heavy versions, rocket launchers. Note that a stability stat below 20 will technically have a small flinch resistance penalty, but only around 5 weapons have a stability stat in that range. Mentioning it here because it's related to the change, the resilience character stat now grants flinch resistance of 0% at 0 stat, 10% at 100 stat. Example, note that sources of flinch resistance stack. A 100 stability stat Suros pulse rifle with Suros synergy active, 10 resilience, no distractions, 2 unflinching pulse rifle armor mods, while buffed by a rally barricade, comes out to 90% flinch resistance. A 70 stat hand cannon, 5 resistance, 1 unflinching hand cannon armor mod, 39% flinch resistance. So there are a lot of things going on here. One of the things that you'll notice as we cover these changes is that there are new stats being added to the game, and old stats are being repurposed to encompass more. Resilience, for example, has never been the most valuable stat in the game, outside of, I don't know, playing a Titan in Void 3.0, but Bungie has now taken this stat and tied it to weapon flinch, and it just kinda makes sense. The more resilience you have, the better you should be able to take a shot. While I believe all you ever needed was a tier 5 resilience, because of diminishing returns with how HP works, this left resilience for the most part feeling like a wasted stat, especially on any class that's not a Titan. Now that it's tied to flinch resistance, it becomes more valuable than ever. Bungie is trying to make stats more valuable as they open up the RPG aspect of the game, and I say it's about time. Look, the reality is, there's only so much Bungie can do when it comes to weapons at this point. One 140 hand cannon is relatively the same as the next, often with near identical god rolls, or near enough not to matter. Destiny weapons in their current iteration have reached a bottleneck, an evolutionary dead end if you will. Sure, A Zealot's reward might be better than a likely suspect, but how much better, and is it worth the time grinding out a Zealot's reward? We're at a point where good is often good enough, which is a problem with how Destiny treats rewards, but that's a video for another day. So short of sunsetting or going to a Destiny 3, adding new stats is basically all Bungie has at this point. Speaking of stats, the next stat change we're talking about is in-air accuracy. Oh, this is going to piss a lot of hunters off. The TLDR is, you no longer get to jump 87 times in the air and have basically perfect accuracy because you put an Icarus grip on. Now you have to invest into a brand new stat. Quote, Airborne gunplay. Before getting into build crafting, we've made a fundamental change to the modifiers applied while airborne. Your primary weapons will have less randomness in projectile accuracy in most cases. You'll have less aim assist instead, and will need precise aiming to land your shots, without building heavily into airborne. We've added a new stat, Airborne Effectiveness, which is present on all weapons except those being airborne doesn't have an effect. Swords, for example, which map into aspects of airborne gunplay using these guidelines. With little to no investment, 0 to 30 airborne stat, a character will have a smaller accuracy penalty than retail, but will have significantly lower aim assist. With minimum investment, 31 to 50 airborne stat, a character will have around the same in-air accuracy as Icarus-equipped weapons do currently, but with noticeably lower aim assist. With substantial investment, 51 to 70 airborne stat, a character will have better accuracy than retail weapons with Icarus, with fewer misses due to randomness, but with reduced aim assist. With specialized investment, 71 to 99 airborne stat, a character will have no airborne accuracy penalty, with very slightly less aim assist. With full investment, 100 airborne stat, a character will have no airborne accuracy penalty and the same aim assist. This stat has been hand-tuned on all exotic weapons, everything that shipped in Season 16 or 17, and everything that shipped as Trials of Osiris or Nightfall loot. Older legendary weapons will have a default value set per weapon archetype to a value just below the middle of the allowed stat range. Note, this will be a hidden stat at Season 17 launch, similar to aim assist and recoil direction. You'll be able to check out the stat on a specific weapon through the API, and in Season 18, several previously hidden stats will be available on the weapon inspection screen. Bungie then goes on to list a few scenarios in which you can increase the airborne stat, like Heat Rising plus 70 while Heat Rising is activated. There's also a handful of exotic armor that revolves around being airborne. These exotics will give various stats or penalties based on either specific weapons or all archetypes. For example, Foe Tracer will give a plus 20 to all weapons, while Mechaneer's Trick Sleeve will give a plus 50 to sidearms. And quite possibly the biggest news to come out of this is the nerf to Stompies. Now, Stompies will give a negative 50 to your airborne stat. But this also goes into what we were talking about earlier, the use of stats to incentivize things that may not have been incentivized before. Well, a lot of other exotics that may not have seen a lot of play before, now have an airborne stat allocated to them to incentivize their use. Also something of note, and maybe I'm just reading way too into it, but Necrotic Grips has a plus 30 to Weapons of Sorrow, which means one of two things. One, Bungie will have to tune Necrotic Grip every time they introduce a new Weapon of Sorrow. Or two, Weapons of Sorrow, even if they don't get special perks, are now treated like Suros or Viced weapons. Before Witch Queen, Foundry coding didn't seem to be a thing. Sure, Foundry weapons shared some similarities, but this mainly resided in archetypes and perks. Now we have source perks and Foundry coding. Necrotic Grip receiving an update for a subfamily of weapons that were only ever connected in the lore opens the door for Bungie to do this on a much more substantial level. Much like stats, weapons, and perks, I believe exotic armor has sort of reached a bottleneck for what devs can do. This is why I wouldn't be surprised to see the Helm of Inmost Light return. There was a lot of exotics in Destiny 1 that really, when you boiled down what they did, just gave you another perk from your subclass. Helm of Inmost Light, for example, gave you 2 perks from your subclass. Now with the aspect and fragment system being implemented across the board, I can see Bungie tying aspects or fragments to exotics, allowing players to sort of double dip when it comes to class builds. But I think a more interesting path would be to have exotics that are tied to or created for these subfamilies of weapons, Again, Bungie seems to be adding more relevance to loot in the game by opening the game up, adding more stats, adding more RPG elements which recontextualize a lot of things that we already have without necessarily invalidating them. Now, before I get too far ahead of myself, let's talk about special weapons. One-hit kill and special ammo. There are several damage buffs external to weapons that allow weapons to one-hit kill without much investment, specifically when combined with an external 20% damage buff. As an example, Empowering Rift can give mini sniper rifles one-hit body shot capabilities in the Crucible. Most of these use the same buff under the hood, so we've adjusted them all at once. With these changes, it's going to be much rarer to get an easy one-hit kill with a weapon that wouldn't typically allow it. Reduce the damage bonus from Empowering Rift, High Energy Fire, and Inertia Overdrive from 20% to 15% against players. No effect in PvE. In addition, we want special ammo to be less plentiful, making it more difficult to chain special weapon kills. Finally, they disabled ammo scavenger mods in PvP. Why it took so long? Who knows? They also go on to talk about how they're nerfing shotguns again, nerfing fusion rifles again, nerfing sniper rifles again. Not really important. In fact, if I was to say anything was important, the big takeaway from that is, next season, unless something is done about bows, specifically bows like Le Monarch, yikes. If you think dying to special weapons is annoying, there's a handful of gimmick weapons that are about to become meta that were held in check by special weapons. Another consequence of these changes is the game's about to become a lot slower. I see a lot of laning in the future because people are going to want to use Le Monarch or bows in general, and then a 120 to 140 hand cannon to clean up the kill. While this is something we see now, I have a feeling it's going to become a lot more common once special weapons have been nerfed. And because of this, other things that are going to be really good are going to be pulse rifles. However, that's not to say that there won't be counterplay. With shotguns getting nerfed, weapons like Last Word and sidearms in general will likely fill that ecological niche. I can definitely see double primaries becoming more prominent, and honestly at this point, there's no reason if you are still using special weapons not to use a rapid fire fusion rifle. With all of that said, when was the last time a significant sandbox change hit Destiny and went off without a hitch? Things are going to be rough. Not only do we have these huge sandbox changes coming next season, but we have Arc or Solar 3.0. While I like a lot of these changes on paper, there is obviously going to be growing pains when they're first released. And the fact that we won't have a full sandbox for another 3 months leaves Destiny in this weird place where it'll be hard to judge if it's good or not. I mean, I'm still going to, don't get me wrong, content is content. But of course, with the caveat that we don't have the full picture of what the sandbox actually is. And I think anybody reviewing the sandbox or talking about the sandbox without that caveat is being disingenuous. And I don't like that state of the game. I'm not simping for Bungie, but it is what it is. We have to be honest about the state of the game. And the reality is, we won't have the full game for another 3 months after these changes. So yeah, it is what it is. With that said, I think the biggest takeaway from all of this isn't necessarily one change or another, but in fact the blanket recontextualization of stats and perks and exotics and rewards that we already have in the game, making them more RPG. A sort of rewards 3.0 if I was to be so dramatic. We now have reasons to chase things that already exist in the game, without the sunsetting of what we've already earned. And I think Bungie needs to expand on this going forward. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Remember to like, but only if you did. Subscribe for more. Feel free to donate to my Patreon if you're feeling particularly generous. But above all else, stay frosty.